I'd like to start off, these techniques talking about I figured this out accidentally, but one of the best ways to keep lures from snagging off the bottom on chunk rocky rivers or like any river in general. But these work really good. These catch a lot of fish. I've caught great big smallmouth, you know, 3, 4 plus pounds, and on spinning gear no less. So really fun to reel them in, and that is going to be. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little Nico rig. So this is on a 4-inch Senko. Um, and essentially we got to do here is so that's on a 4-inch Senko. I know you can't really see that, and I know I'm a hot mess over here. Don't have everything ready. Shame on me. So essentially what you're going to do with this guy is you're going to need an O-ring. You can use, O-ring tool. You can use, these fancy pliers. I really like these. I think you should be able to find them locally. They seem to have the best O-rings, and for getting the most life out of your plastic as possible, we're just going to slide that up on our bait. And you'll notice on these worms, they put a little egg sac there in the middle. And on this 4-inch Senko, that's where I like to put my O-ring. You can kind of see it there. And it's got a little tab there for me to stick my hook in. And so once we got our O-ring on there, then we need a nail weight. With a 4-inch Senko, I can get away with a 1/16 ounce lead nail. I recommend lead when river fishing. It's a bummer because lead is actually really not good for the environment. But when river fishing, you tend to lose a lot of things. So if money is a concern, 4-inch lead nail works. 16th ounce. I'm doing terrific. 16th ounce lead nail works great, and a 4-inch Senko. So now this is going to hop on the bottom, just like that. It's kind of like a wacky rig, except you can add a little bit of weight to it. And what I like about this is when I throw this in the river, my hook is suspended off the bottom. So my weight is what's in contact with the rocks, my hook is not, and I don't snag very many of these at all, and it is a really great system. The downside to an eco rig, and here's a hook I like to use. It's an Owner wacky hook. These are pretty cost effective, and they're pretty good. I've caught really big fish on them. Oops. I'll just throw one of these on here for you. That was a 1/0. I like to go with a little bit bigger hook if I can, because then I don't run into as many issues. So that's how it's going to look, just bouncing on the bottom. And having that weight down there allows that to, that's what's going to fall into a crevice in a rock, as opposed to your hook most of the time. Now you can still snag these, you can still lose these, but that is my personal preference. And so this little 4-inch Senko is a great way for getting a lot of bites. You will catch big fish on this. The Senko, some people really like this technique for forward-facing sonar, and those guys heavily prefer the Senko for the Nico rig. They're usually using like a 5-inch. I use a 4-inch for, when I'm fishing in current, because this is so soft and it's so heavily salted that if I try to use a 5-inch, it just kind of folds over the whole time and it doesn't stand up nice. A couple other baits you could use. This is a Yum Dinger. It's a lot more cost effective. It's a lot more rigid too. So when I stick a nail weight in there, with a 5-inch, I can get away with a little bit bigger of a nail weight, like a 3/32. It's probably the biggest I can get away with. Oh, I forgot to mention, you can also use tungsten nails, and you can fit a lot bigger tungsten nail in your worm because it's not as dense. And that tungsten nail costs a lot more. So I tend to not do that for worm fishing, but that can be a really great way for you to get a little bit deeper, especially because if you have issues with too much current, then it's going to just want to carry your bait away. You're not going to reach down to the bottom. So that might be an instance where you want to use the tungsten nail, and you can go up, 3/32, 1/8 ounce, no problem at all, and that'll help out a lot more in that regard. This Yum Dinger, I prefer this over to the Senko when it comes to current, only because this is a little more rigid and it stands up a little better on a taut line. So I've done a little bit better, but that being said, it kind of boils down to personal preference. The other thing I have used, which seems to work best to get it to stand up totally, are Z-Man floating. So these are the Zinkers. These have a floating plastic in them. Or these are made out of a floating plastic. So these guys are very soft, very stretchy, but these are super, super durable. The difficult thing is getting a nail weight in there. I don't think I have found a reliable method to get a nail weight into the Z-Man. Z-Man does make a special nail weight specifically for these. I have some friends who have a company called Cypher Fishing. They make a really good nail weight. But outside of that, I've used wood screws, no problem at all. And why I like the floating plastic is this stands up a lot better than the other worms. But if I want to get the most bites, that little 4-inch Yamasenko is great. So, and when you use these VMC crossover rings, I think they're called, that seems to be the best way to get the most life out of your Yamamoto Senko. So, yeah, give the Nico rig a try. I love throwing it out into the current, letting it just, bounce along on a taut or semi-taut line and let the current kind of sweep it away. And I'll give it the occasional hop off the bottom to get a little action out of it and try and trigger a strike. But I took my dad fishing with one of these. He caught like 20 fish in 2 hours, so they're really hard to beat, and it works great on years like this year where the water's so low. You can really get it down there, and it'll just bounce along the bottom. You won't have any problems at all. If you fish a spot with a really heavy current, then this might not be your bait for that spot, but in areas where you have a really good eddy and current break, give this guy a try. These also work good when the mornings and evenings if the fish are in the back eddies. They'll kind of get away from the main current to go search for food, and that can be a great time to throw this guy as well. I just talked about the Nico rig and how much I love fishing that through chunky rock, and how easily it comes through structure. I'd like to share a little bit more, or I'd like to talk about what's called the Carolina rig. So a lot of people are very familiar with the famous Texas rig. It's a super versatile way to fish around cover. It's weedless. The problem with the Texas rig is that those bullet weights get stuck in rocks super easy. Essentially, what happens is you will have, you know, rock here, bullet weight comes along, lodges in there, won't come out. So, if I need to fish somewhere with a lot faster current and I can't get away with something like a Nico rig, I really enjoy a Carolina rig. It's still pretty snag resistant. The I like using an egg sinker for rolling over the tops of rock. If you manage your line pretty good, the Carolina rig comes through cover really well. Its ultimate weakness is large rocks and the current wrapping your line around large rocks. So there is a possibility that like you can lose a bunch of these. They take longer to rig up. It is a bummer, but I have caught a lot of really big smallmouth doing this, and this is one of the best ways to get a bait down there and get a natural presentation in fast current. So what this is going to look like, you're going to start off with an egg sinker. Oftentimes, if I can get away with it, I might go with like a 3/8, but sometimes I have to go up to a 1/2 ounce. Maybe in extreme situations, you'd have to go up to a 3/4 ounce. So I got an egg sinker that's sliding all over the place. Then we have a swivel. I'm just going to tie that on here. This takes a little minute to rig up, and it is really annoying when you lose one. But one thing you can do is you can come in with a handful of Carolina rig leaders tied up, and then all you have to do is throw on a bullet weight and tie on, and you're good to go. And then that's probably the best, most time efficient way to utilize this rig on the river. I like to use bigger line with this. I am usually throwing this on like a bait caster, so like a medium heavy or heavy rod. And okay, so I got my egg sinker, I got my swivel. Now I need my leader, and so I'm gonna use like 30-ish inches of. I like to use bigger line for this technique so that the current really grabs onto it and carries it along for me. Because what really defeats me here is if I go too light on my line, I may, in theory, get more bites, but not if my line goes straight to the bottom and gets wrapped around a rock. So if I use like 17-pound main leader, and usually like 30 to 40-pound braid main line, 17-pound leader, and then my Carolina rig leader, I might use like 15-pound, and that way, in theory, hopefully my Carolina rig leader breaks before my main line, and then all I have to do is replace my Carolina rig leader. But I would definitely recommend have a bunch of these on hand when you go down to the river. Really should have some scissors around here. Okay, so now after I've done like, I know you can't see that, like 30-ish inches, it's kind of a booger to cast, but, and then we're going to use like a 3 or 4/0 EWG hook, depending on what size of bait I'm trying to use. I'll just tie this on here real quick so you can see it. Okay. It really is annoying to rig up, but if you pre-tie a bunch of leaders with swivels, then like it really isn't so bad when you get to the river. So this is what it ends up looking like. You can see I got my hook down here. You know, there's like I said 30 inches. That's about right. Now we just need a bait. And so the premise behind a Carolina rig is this is a dragging technique. People use this in grass for largemouth. People use this on, you know, long points on big reservoirs. I find it works great in rivers too. And in this instant, the current's dragging it along instead of me. So if I were to cast upstream, I would definitely want to reel in line as the current is bringing it down. I'm trying to fish this on a fairly taut line, and I'm trying to let the current really catch the line. So I like heavier line because of that. But let me grab a couple baits for you. I really should have put a lot more emphasis on how versatile a Carolina rig is. You know, I think I rigged this up with a 3/0 hook. You could do, you know, great big 5/0 hook. You could do, you know, worm hook. You could do a little hook, and you can have just a little tiny bait on there. There is a lot you can do with a Carolina rig. So let me go through some baits I have and still love to throw on this rig because you can do almost anything. You know, like this is a 4-inch X-Zone muscleback crawl. That's a kicking crawl, and you know, do that kind of motion. I have done great on kicking craws. They make a smaller one. They have a muscleback finesse crawl that's like 3.5 inches. That's a really good option too for smallmouth. I guess, yeah, I have a little 3.5-inch Yamamoto craw right here, and you know that's another kick and craw that would work really well. I do enjoy baits that have a little bit of their own action, but you know sometimes they want something that's pretty subtle too. You could absolutely take that same Yamamoto Senko that we were Nico rigging, and you can throw it on your Carolina rig, and you can just bounce a Senko along the bottom, you know. Tubes. Tubes are a smallmouth staple, and usually I think it works best to rig them with a jig head inside. But you can absolutely, like, this is a really cool company. This is Magnum Baits. This is their reg tube. But what's cool is that head is solid. And so the tube body flexes, but the head is solid. And so this would make just a killer Carolina rig bait. Because this was meant to be used to punch through weeds, but it works great on that EWG hook. If you wanted to go, you know, really small and get a lot more bites, yeah, X-Zone has a really cool little baby creature bait. They're stealth finesse creature. That's a really cool bait too, and I catch smallmouth with it all the time. You can get away with literally anything. Like here's a baby brush hog. I've caught a lot of big smallmouth on this guy too. Now, those were great. A lot of people are probably thinking I'm giving away all my secrets. I don't really feel like I have very many secrets. You know, if you wanted a bait fish profile, you could throw a fluke. Along that same Carolina rig, you're just dragging it along the bottom, or letting the current drag it along the bottom. But like I said, you want to keep your line fairly taut because that heavy weight's going to drag it down regardless of whether you feed it line or not. So I personally prefer to keep my line taut, and maybe I'll cast a little bit upstream, and I'll just keep my line. I'll pick up all the slack that the current is throwing my way, so that the line can make a bow and the current will drag it along. But yeah, you can use almost anything with a Carolina rig, and it gets it down quick to the bottom. And so in heavy current, you can throw a heavy weight on there, and you can really put the hurt on some bass that you otherwise couldn't reach. Well, as you guys can see by my change of clothes, I decided to format things a little bit differently. I decided to put a little more content in not as many videos, so I'm going to share with you guys quick about a couple more bottom contact baits, starting with the drop shot. So I'm just tying a Palomar knot here around a finesse hook with a big tag end. So that is what the drop shot is all about. But the idea behind this is that the drop shot is that once again I'm suspending my hook off the bottom and keeping a weight. So there's a little 3/16 ounce cylinder weight down there. And with the drop shot, I can kind of do some different things that I'm not able to do with those other rigs. Real quickly, one tip I have for you here: take that that clip there and give it a nice bend, and that'll keep it from wedging itself in between as many rocks. But you end up with, I like at least 12, 16 inches of leader there, but you end up with your hook way up there and your weight down here, and then ideally if you're going to get snagged, it's going to be your weight that gets snagged. One reason I like the drop shot is because if a fish hears my weight bouncing on the bottom, they're not going to miss it looking around because it's behind a boulder. They're going to be able to see that bait suspended up off the bottom, but it's still in contact with the bottom, which is nice. So with a drop shot, I personally really enjoy like a minnow style bait. You can also use a finesse worm. These Zoom finesse worms are super, super cheap. You get 20 in a pack for like $6. Those are really hard to beat. Robo worm is kind of the staple in finesse worm fishing. So all of those are really good options. But if I want to bait fish, I can just use this minnow. Those worms get a bit more action though, and worms catch big fish. I've caught big smallmouth on both of those rigs, but then under the water, that's going to be bouncing along like this. And once again, I'm going to use that current to my advantage. Typically throwing a drop shot on spinning gear because it's got really light components. But if I wanted to do something similar on bait casting gear, I can always pull out this here's a Tokyo rig. Once again, hook is suspended up off the bottom with the weight. Everything I've showed so far as bottom contact baits have been, by and large, these are all, for the most part, pretty good about coming through in chunky rivers comparatively. But so far, everything up to this point has been really cost effective. Tokyo rigs are where things start, climbing in cost a little bit. When you get them, they're going to look just like that. Maybe a 3/0, maybe a 4/0, just like that Carolina rig. I can throw the same kind of baits on this that I did that Carolina rig. The difference is that this guy, I can keep it a little more taut and I can work it a little bit more. I can't really work a Carolina rig, so the Carolina rig just drifts along. But the Carolina rig can get caught on boulders, and this is still going to, you're going to lose these. It's just, there's no way of getting around that. But I can work this a little more, and I can keep my line taut so I can feel when I'm about to get snagged and then yank it through. When I want to add a weight on here, so, using that same egg sinker since I'm fishing chunk rock, I just slide it on there and bend it back upward so that it can't fall off. And then, you're good to fish your Tokyo rig in that current. A couple honorable mentions here. One is, some kind of compact jig. These, obviously things start getting quite a bit more expensive, and that is hard to stomach when we're, doing river smallmouth current fishing. So, like, this might be more, a better idea for when you're fishing the slack water. But one thing that's nice about it is if I keep my line taut, I can really hop this off the bottom. So I don't really have to let it sit in the bottom for very long. I can employ a technique called stroking. So I'll cast it out there. I'll keep my line taut. And when I feel it hit bottom, I'll just stroke it back up. Feel it hit bottom, stroke it back up. And so I can kind of power fish with this. And so that's why I included that in here, is it's a little bit faster than some of the other techniques. It sucks a lot. This is one I made. It sucks to lose something like this. It's a little compact jig with a 3-inch Yamamoto craw. But I can cover a little more water. I can fish boulders and slack water really well with this. It'll come through logs a lot better than some of these other techniques. But, like I said, if I do want to fish it in that current, I can just cast it out there as it's floating along. I'll just stroke it up every time it hits bottom, and then it looks like a fleeing crawdad. And, it can be a very effective way of going about it. You will it does suck to lose these, but that works too. And then, let me grab one more thing here. I don't feel like I can talk about river smallmouth fishing without talking a little more about tubes. I've got some tubes here. So there's a little downsized tube. I personally like a 3.5, 3 3/4 inch tube. That is my personal sweet spot. The thing I like so much about, tubes are a smallmouth staple, so I can't just not talk about them. You are more prone to lose these in a river current situation. The plus side with a tube, just like that compact jig there, is that you tend to weed out a lot of the smaller fish. I've absolutely caught tiny smallmouth on great big old tubes, so it's not like I'm totally removing your opportunity to catch fish. But oftentimes what people will do with a tube is they'll kind of go at it with a backwards approach, and they will intentionally use a heavy 3/8 ounce weight trying to get their tube snagged. And I don't have one handy here, but maybe I'll dig that up in a little bit. They'll actually try and get their tube snagged, so they'll fire it out into the current. They'll you can still stroke them just like that jig, but a lot of people like to get them snagged and then rip them free on heavy line, and that can trigger bites too. they also work really good in that slack water if you don't want to lose them. Those, for the most part, those first four techniques I talked about, I think, come through cover a lot better. And you can absolutely fish a tube on a Carolina rig or a Tokyo rig. That might be a little better option for you. But it is still a very deadly tactic to stick a 3/8 ounce jig head into a tube and, bounce it on the rocks down there. So I had to talk about it. Um, you know, but that might not be everyone's cup of tea because you go through a lot of tubes that way. Real quick before I go, I thought I'd give you guys some examples of some of my favorite tubes. I am a tube fisherman. I use them quite a bit. You do lose a lot of them. X-Zone, their 3.75 tube. It's probably my favorite. As you can tell, I go through a lot of those. Other ones that work really good. Dry Creek. This is an Idaho company. So support local. That they even have a Snake River craw, and their double tip tubes are pretty cool because I can fit a little bit bigger jig head in there. Then that's what I just shoved a 3/8 ounce jig head in there, no problem. You just poke the eye out when you want to use it. I'm not going to rig it up right now, but you can absolutely go to town with those. There's lots of good tubes out there. Lots of companies are coming out with, if you want more bites on a tube, if you like a tube and you want more bites, you can throw like a 2.5 inch tube. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just not so much my cup of tea, because usually if I'm fishing a tube, I'm accepting the risk of losing more fish for a bigger bite. I suppose, I don't know, I just show this to you guys anyway. I'm gonna use, these work really well with, there's a Strike King 3.5 inch tube. This works really good with those X-Zone tubes too. This is called a stupid tube head. And how this works is I'm going to shove this in backwards, work it all the way through until I get down close to the front. Then I'm going to and I'm not quite totally on the front there, but that's what I want. And then I'm just going to rotate that guy around and point it back to the head, and then I take that and just like an EWG head, I rig that weedless. And so if you want a way of snagging fewer tubes, the stupid tube head is a really good way of doing that. You're a little more limited on the size of jig head you can use, but that can be a deadly way to catch a lot, get snagged fewer times and catch a lot of fish on a tube. Like I said, I've caught a lot of, 4.5. I've even caught like 5 pound smallmouth on tubes out, river fishing. So, if I had to pick a technique that could catch, big fish, big smallmouth anywhere, not just rivers, it would definitely be a tube. But so I couldn't really not include that in this. So, anywho, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments.